Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
I usually spend every New Year's celebration at home with a bottle of liquor as my only dependable company. Last year, I was doing just that while binge-watching Supernatural. I remember checking my phone to see what time it was. 11:57 p.m. By then, my vision was blurring, and I was well on my way to my tradition of getting shit-faced for the new year. My family had told me for years that they were concerned. They said that I spent too much time alone and that I needed to get out and just do something. Suicide had come to mind numerous times over the years due to the shit that life throws your way. Multiple failed relationships, jobs that went nowhere, and the possibility of good things that just blew up in your face. It all takes a toll on your mental health after time. Last year was no exception. I had found out a few months before that my girlfriend had cheated multiple times and had also told other people about it. Oh, and she always thought it was particularly hilarious, making crude remarks like, "He's so stupid that he can't even tell what's going on." I drank more. It was out of the corner of my blurry vision that I saw a black figure standing by my door. I tried to focus, but I was too deep in the bottle to do that. I just saw this out-of-focus, black, human-shaped thing. Do it. You know you want to. You know none of this is worth it. You know life is pointless and that none of this matters. Why not do it? Nobody loves you. Nobody cares about you. Not even Carrie. She never loved you. Never cared about you. And you're just going to repeat the same mistakes for the rest of your life. So why bother? The voice that said this was deep and gravelly, sounding a bit distant, like a radio station on the verge of cutting off. While the voice spoke, I felt the energy drain out of me, and paralysis set in. I can remember mumbling back, "Yeah, you're right. It doesn't matter. I should just kill myself and end it. How about a knife? That one on the counter over there. It looks sharp enough and should end your pathetic life in no time." "Yes," I replied. At this point, I felt like I was in a dream and that I had no control over my actions. I shuffled into the kitchen, grabbed the knife, and plunged it into my wrist. I woke up in the hospital. My friend Colin had come over, and because he had a key, he was able to get in. He found me on the kitchen floor in a puddle of blood. He was a night shift nurse at a nearby hospital, and his quick thinking saved my life. I was later admitted to a psych ward with my cooperation. I thought I had gone completely mental. They diagnosed me with having a schizoaffective disorder with severe depression. I spent the next 2 months rebuilding myself mentally and came out feeling reinvigorated. It was around Halloween that I was browsing around Reddit and found a post called, "What is the creepiest phenomenon with no explanation?" I am very much into the supernatural and believe in most spiritual beliefs about the afterlife, demons, and ghosts, but I'm not religious. I saw a reply to the post with a link that said, "How about the mass amount of people that commit suicide on New Year's and their survivors claim to see a tall black figure telling them to do it? Here's a link for proof of the phenomenon." Chills covered my body and I felt my muscles twitch. The memory of the events of that night came back. The black figure, the command it gave, the way it wanted me to kill myself, or sacrifice myself. I posed this question to the post. What does it want? Someone replied, "Well, from what I gather, it's been talked about for centuries among various cultures in one form or another. An otherworldly spirit that comes back once a year to gather enough souls to fill itself for another year. Like a soul-eating bear back to hibernation." This is when I went down the rabbit hole of Google and researched more into this thing. About 25 pages back, I found a result that was close to what I was looking for. It was on an independent paranormal research group's website, which I will keep anonymous, and the article answered many questions that I had. The earliest mention went back to Roman times, and it was simply referred to as Tenebris, written as a name, not a description. and tenebris, translated from Latin, means darkness. Tenebris was said to appear at winter solstice, and once convinced an entire legion, which I found out was 5,000 legionnaires, to rush off a high cliff while they were pursuing a Germanic army, and nearly all of them had died. Julius Caesar found out and demanded a massive sacrifice back in Rome, written by him as, quote, to appease the beast Tenebris. A few days later, I went back to the Reddit post and saw dozens of people had commented, saying that they had seen Tenebris. I messaged a few of them and we started a group chat on Discord. The number grew to over 250 by December 1st, and we all had had a similar experience. One guy was walking on the sidewalk in New York City when he saw a figure in an alleyway and the overwhelming urge to leap in front of a taxi but was able to fight it off. Another man was on a cruise ship and saw a dark figure in the water, demanding that he jump overboard to be with it, which he also did. He said he had 1 foot over the rails when an attendant grabbed him seconds before he could leap. A woman who was suffering from heroin addiction was nearly coaxed into taking a lethal dose by a shadow man. They all sound a little similar, right? I have no idea what to do about it, but it's real. I've seen it. And I'm terrified it will come back this New Year's. It's a few days before New Year's and I'm already starting to feel it. I haven't moved from this couch in days and there is plenty of alcohol. It usually hits hard this time of year, as it is just a reminder of how lonely I am. Colin is out of state with family this year, and the rest of my friends are also preoccupied. So much for that. I guess I will sulk around my apartment. You know, to keep the tradition alive. It's been a couple of days since I wrote the rest of this. I've seen it a few times, lurking in corners, hiding from the light. It's waiting. It will pounce once the time is right, when it is at full power. I know it will try to take me again, but hopefully, I don't listen to Tenebris this year.
New Year's Day was always a special time in my life, both for what it represented and because of who I spent it with. Back then, and even until recently, I had no idea how horrifically dark it would turn later in my life. I grew up, well, you could call it a chaotic environment. My parents were alcoholics, and there was barely ever any food in the house, owing to my mom and dad spending most of their paychecks on booze. That and my pops was always beating the tar out of me. I'd show up to school with a black eye and all the kids would point and whisper. The teachers would act super nice and friendly to me on account of it, but no one, not the kids, not their parents, and not the teachers would actually step in and do anything about it. It was one of those towns where everyone knew each other and saw each other as good people, even while it was obvious some were beating their kids. Enter my 3 friends, Rachel, Jenny, and Ryan. Their stories were similar to mine. Ryan's parents were neglectful and verbally abusive. Rachel's parents were practically the same as mine, and Jenny, well, how do I put this? Jenny's dad liked to go into her room at night. A lot. By the time she was 13, Jenny was in foster care and her dad was spending the first of many years in the state pen. It was almost like fate, somewhat poetic, that we all found each other. It started on a camping trip through our school when we were assigned to the same squad. I noticed this kid, big glasses, straw-like hair shooting all over the place, getting shoved to the ground over and over by Rodney Finchley. Rodney was a major league loser until the day he got shot and killed in a drug deal going wrong at age 17. The kid with the glasses kept trying to get up and Rodney kept shoving him down and laughing with his friends like this was the funniest thing they'd ever seen.
Why do you keep getting up? Just stay down!
While I watched, out of nowhere, I'd started getting really, really angry. Years later, I realized I reacted the way I did because that SOB Rodney reminded me of my dad. So I marched over to him. Before I even knew what was happening, I had gave him a bloody nose. Long story short, Rodney and his gang of freaks steered clear of me and Ryan from then on. Later that day, Ryan introduced me to the rest of what would become our squad. There was Jenny, this girl with bright blonde hair and wide, inquisitive eyes. She was one of the most brilliant people I've ever known. There was Rachel, this incredibly gifted, socially conscious Asian girl with braces and dark eyes. And finally, there was Ryan himself, with the biggest heart ever. From that day on, and throughout the 6th grade, we shared our stories with one another and bonded over them. Eventually, the 4 of us became inseparable. We would have done anything for each other. When we were 15, for example, Jenny and Rachel spent all night helping Ryan write a love poem to his crush just in time for Valentine's Day. When we were 16, Jenny's boyfriend cheated on her with a head cheerleader. So Rachel and I smashed in the windows of his car. But New Year's Day was something else entirely. By the time we were 12, we'd gotten into this habit of celebrating New Year's Day down at the lake in the center of the woods, on the outskirts of town. We'd go down there and play games, having make-believe adventures and battles. Our childish minds took us to far-off galaxies, primeval forests, and ancient cities below the waves, where we met the frightening, inspiring gods of those imaginary worlds. All of it brought to life by a shared agreement between our group of 4. The most interesting and intriguing thing that we made up and agreed on, however, was the mythos. It was our way of coping with what we were all going through at the time. The mythos are the rules. It was the religion, the spirituality that we agreed to live by, summed up in 10 simple words. The year we created the mythos, after a day of exploring the farthest reaches of our imagination, we stood together at the water's edge and welcomed the new year with these words. Every action has a reaction, and every call a response. Those were the words we said that year and every year after, in that spot with the waves of that nameless lake lapping in time with them. I don't remember who came up with them that first year or even why, but they and their meaning are something I've thought about a lot recently. It wasn't always just us, either. After that first year, the state finally became aware of Jenny's situation and did what needed to be done. They placed her in foster care and she transferred to a different district. From then on, she'd bring kids from her school over to celebrate with us. It was incredible showing someone new the world we'd built together and the words that strung them together. It would always end at the water's edge. Together, we'd repeat the familiar words. Every action has a reaction, and every call a response. Afterwards, everyone outside our group would go on their way and it'd just be us 4 again. Things went on like that for years, gradually tapering off as things got better for us. By the time I was 17, Jenny had been adopted by her foster parents, an excellent pair of people. Doctors at the local hospital, and after hearing about my situation, they'd insist that I move in with them too. My parents put up no resistance to me moving out, and just like that, I found my life transformed. All it took was having a safe, quiet place to call home. The year before that, it had been Ryan. He'd moved in with an older cousin who had moved into town practically out of the blue. 2 years prior, Rachel had moved in with her older sister, Kim. Once she'd gotten out from under her parents' thumb, Kim had sworn she'd never come back and moved away. After receiving a couple of emails from her little sister, however, she changed her mind and moved back in town in order to provide a better environment for Rachel. In the end, we all finally had a place to hang our hats and people that cared. Even so, the four of us remained a family. Fast forward to present times, a couple of days before New Year's Day, mere months away from graduating high school. We all wondered what we were going to do. It was all we talked about when we went over to Jenny's house to have dinner together. Just the four of us, as her parents were away at a medical conference in England. Jenny and I were setting up and dressed to the nine.
Jake, would you get that?
Sure thing. I swung the door open and smiled as I saw Ryan and Rachel.
Buddy!
Ryan embraced me in a bear hug as Rachel leaned over to give me a peck on the cheek.
So, Rye, you still committed to being an actor?
Jenny smirked. She tried to saw a chunk of meat off the chicken at the center of the table. Ryan had found out the same year we'd start hanging out together that he had a real passion for theater. All his sensitivity and flair, all the qualities that years ago made him a target for trolls like Rodney, had made it possible for him to flourish in the field of drama. His friendship with us and his delight at being on stage were the two biggest positives in his life. Ryan shrugged before popping a morsel of chicken into his mouth.
You see,
Stop talking with your mouth full.
I just think I'm suited for it, you know? It's what I'm meant to do.
Meant to do by what? Fate? The gods?
Oh God, remember that stuff we used to do at the lake every New Year's Day?
My eyes shot open wide. Yeah, the games we used to play. Oh God, what we used to do?
Jenny would drink some of the water from the lake. A real solemn affair, if you ask me. But I can't for the life of me remember the rest.
I remember. The mythos, right? Every action has a reaction and every call a response.
Oh wow, we took that so seriously back then.
We had such good times, didn't we?
Rachel nodded quickly.
We did, and now you're off to be an actor. I'm off to Harvard, hopefully, and Jenny's off to med school. Well, eventually.
I think something needs to be said, and everyone quieted to listen. I think no matter where we go or what we do, we should always remember that this, right here, all of us, this is what matters most. We've been through so much and we'll always be together. All of us, no matter where we are, we're family and that'll never change. Ryan raised his glass and everyone else followed suit.
Hear, hear.
To friendship.
To family.
After we downed our drinks, we continued chattering away for a while. A short time later, the food was gone. We were full and it was time for bed. We all retired to our rooms and drifted off to sleep, but not for long. I was startled awake by ragged screaming coming from the bathroom down the hall. I jumped out of bed and ran. By the time I made it to the door, Ryan and Rachel were there too. Together, we burst into the bathroom and found the floor covered with clear, watery vomit and Jenny in the middle of it all, hunched over the toilet. The water in the bowl was dark red, the rim splashed and streaked in crimson. Jenny looked up at us with tears in her eyes, a look of agony on her face as we entered the room. We all stood there, frozen in shock and horror, staring at Jenny's blood-covered jaw. As she retched more, my mind started to race. Was it food poisoning? No, not rationalized. It couldn't be. None of the rest of us were sick and we'd all eaten the same food. As I stood thinking, Jenny vomited again and leaned back, her chest heaving with every ragged breath. Rachel knelt down and wrapped her arms around her, stroking her hair in an attempt to comfort her. Ryan ran downstairs to call 911. Jenny ended up in the hospital. Once she'd been admitted, we notified her parents, who tried to get on the first flight back home. Unfortunately, due to a variety of setbacks, their flights kept getting delayed and it was some time before they arrived. In the meantime, the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with Jenny. After observing her overnight and in spite of our protests, they advised us there was nothing further they could do, and so they released her, advising us to monitor her and telling her to return to the emergency department if there were any further incidents. Jenny decided to stay at Rachel's. As for me, I headed home and tried to get some sleep. For some reason, however, my mind kept drifting back to the lake, to the celebrations we'd have on those New Year's Day evenings. I fell into a restless sleep and woke exhausted in the morning. Unsure what to do, I called Ryan, who by then had returned home. Ryan, I'm kind of messed up in the head over last night. Can I come over?
Oh, sure thing, buddy.
An hour later, I arrived at Ryan's place. He greeted me at the door, brought me into his room, and waved me over to a beanbag by his bed. Jenny vomiting like that really messed me up, right? Ryan looked over at me and nodded.
No, I feel you. It was really bizarre. But she's gonna be okay, at least, so that's good.
I don't know. I feel really shaken up over it. I don't know. I'm just being stupid, I guess.
I think it might help to talk about something else.
His eyes lit up.
Hey, do you think we should all go do a New Year's Day celebration tomorrow? The way we used to years ago.
I laughed and shook my head. Man, we grew out of that a long time ago. He smiled wistfully, as though reminiscing, and for a little bit, I smiled too, but I could feel a tension between us. Something odd and out of place, and it was growing. After an awkward silence, I said my goodbyes and took my leave. After returning home, I busied myself watching television and browsing the web. At around 10 p.m., I called it quits and headed to bed. I woke up sometime later to the sound of my phone ringing. I groggily reached over and answered it. Hello. It was Rachel. She could barely get her words out. Eventually, I understood what she was getting at, and it made my heart feel like it had dropped right out from under me. Rachel had found Jenny motionless in her upstairs bathroom, lying in a pool of bloody, watery vomit. There was no pulse. The next few hours were a blur. I remember clearly sitting on Rachel's couch, Ryan and I beside her, rubbing her back and trying to console her as the paramedics and police did their work. Hours later, the police and paramedics took off, leaving us with more questions than answers.
How could this even happen?
And I paced back and forth, my mind racing. I threw my hands up, my eyes wide with confusion. I got nothing.
Look, maybe the autopsy will figure it out. In fact, it has to. It has to.
Abruptly, Rachel held a hand up dismissively.
You two need to go.
I immediately protested, but she wouldn't have it.
I need to be alone. Please. Please let me grieve.
Ryan and I made eye contact and then we both nodded at her. we left her place and headed to our respective homes. I had no idea the dark turn the next few hours would take and how they would change everything. I didn't sleep well that night. I dreamt I was standing by the lake on the evening of New Year's Day. Before me was Jenny in her usual gray hoodie and black jeans. I called out to her. Jenny! After a moment, she turned around. What I saw horrified me. Jenny's mouth and jaw were soaked in blood, so thick that it looked black. Ants and beetles raced out of her mouth and across her face. Her eyes shone like headlights. Ah! I woke up, thrashing in bed, heart pounding as I glanced at the clock. It was 3 a.m. Realizing I wouldn't be able to get back to sleep, I called Ryan. He didn't pick up, but I wasn't about to settle for that. Instead, I jumped up, got dressed, and headed out on foot. I was a few blocks from Ryan's house when I noticed the police cars and ambulances lining up along his street. My eyes shot open with fear and I took off running. I spotted a cop writing on a notepad and approached him. In a panic, I begged him to tell me what happened. Ryan had killed himself. He bled out in his bathtub. He must have done it almost immediately after I left. I could see the whole scene in my mind so perfectly. Ryan, still full of nostalgia, a smile plastered on his face, drawing the water and getting undressed. I imagine he smiled even as the razor dug in, even as the drops of blood hitting the water, year after year. Every call, a response. And I felt numb as I walked away from the scene. Not just because Ryan was dead, but because I finally knew. I ran myself ragged getting to Rachel's place. I got the spare key from underneath the doormat and let myself in. The air was still. Everything was quiet. My heart thumped in my chest as I desperately hoped for the best. It sank as I stepped into the living room and heard water running in the kitchen. There I'd found Rachel on the floor beside the sink, lying still in a pooling mixture of blood and water, staring at the ceiling with glassy, unblinking eyes. It appeared she had slipped and hit her head on the kitchen table. I'm at the lake now, and it's near midnight. I'm here because I need to be. This place is thick with memories, and I know my role. Jenny would say the initial prayer and then drink from the lake. Then Ryan made a small cut on his wrist and bled into the water, introducing life into the equation. Next, Ryan and Rachel would restrain the kid, the ones Jenny brought, whoever they were, and force their heads beneath the surface. They held them while they thrashed until they finally went still. Then we'd set the body adrift and let it float away. Jenny had always made sure to pick the ones that wouldn't be missed or cared for. And then I'd give the call. The beings we met during our New Year's games, in the places we traveled to in our minds, they weren't our imagination. Far from it. They were real, and they were ancient, and they were powerful. I'd call out to them, beseeching them to bless the year and our lives with the sacrifice made. We were certain they would answer, and they did. After all, every action has a reaction. Following the rituals, our lives improved dramatically. In exchange for our services, we were granted safety, success, and the ability to forget what we had done in order to get it. But now the response. Even as I speak, I see the waters rippling more and more, as if something is approaching. Every action has a reaction, and every call a response. Never forget, for every call, a response.
Chilling tales for dark nights.